ladies and gentlemen. The story you are about to hear is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
When people think about John Burman, veteran journalist at the Spectator, they get an image kind of like this guy.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
But as we all know, John was much more than that. John, many of your colleagues at the Spectator have stepped forward to offer their thoughts about you and your career here. I've produced this little video. I hope you enjoy it.
John Burman, I credit with keeping me in journalism. Back 30 years ago in 1982, I got fired from one newspaper job. I went up to Guelph and I worked at a weekly. I was only there a week. The paper folded, and I was back in Hamilton, and I was freelancing for the Toronto Star, and I met John at the Hamilton Press Club, and John said, get your resume and go see Carrie Lambie at Thompson Newspaper headquarters at 65 Queen Street West, and drop off your resume and say you'll go anywhere and do anything. So I followed John's advice. Lo and behold, I got hired by Thompson. I worked at a Thompson newspaper and at the Welland Tribune for 4 or 5 years, and then came to the Spectator, and I've been lucky enough to follow John. And John was out in Hallam, Norfolk. I was out in Hallam, Norfolk. He did police. I did police. He did afternoons. I did afternoons. He did 5 to 1 shift. Guess who's doing the 5 to 1 shift? So, they've been big shoes to fill, and I've never filled them. So, John, you will be missed around here.
I could tell you tales about John Burman, but then he might have to kill me. Suffice to say that Johnny and I go back further than either of us can remember at our advanced ages. Johnny was one of the first people I met when I came to the Spectator in 1977, and quickly became and has stayed lifelong, steadfast friend and a very valued colleague. They don't make newsmen like you anymore, Johnny. You're like a bulldog, tenacious, growling, sink your teeth into the story, thrash it around, bite it, chew it, and spit it out until you've got it all well under control. I suspect that those skills were learned and honed at the shoulder of your dear old Alf, with whom many of us also, well, probably not as many as before, but some of us had the pleasure of working here at the Spectator. I wish you good health and happiness and lots of things to do in your retirement, Johnny, and sláinte, my friend.
I have this memory from the 1970s when I was a 20-year-old nobody working at the Oakville Beaver. We were paid so poorly that on this one particular day I didn't have enough gas in the car to get back from an assignment. And it was John who loaned me $2. $2, so I could get back to the office to write a story in competition with him. That's the kind of person John Burman is. I did pay him back, but it was 20 years later. You're gonna be missed around here, always.
So a few years ago, John and I were both working very late one night, the only 2 reporters left in the newsroom. And I was working on a story about a family who had been in a devastating car accident, and several members had been killed. I borrowed a photo of that family from the sweet elderly woman who lived next door to them. I was still working away. John filed and was heading home after a very long day. And without anybody asking him to, he took the photograph, and to do me a favor, he returned it to the elderly woman. And he did it not only to be a team player and help me out, but he did it mostly because he knew how much that photograph meant to that woman. And he not only returned it, but he spent quite a while there talking to her and consoling her. And it wasn't even John's story, but that just speaks volumes about his caring and his compassion.
I already miss John. I miss coming in the morning and getting a coffee and coming over to his desk to chat about whatever crime or fire happened overnight or that morning. The conversations usually ended up being something about complaining about which crime stories didn't make it into the paper, or we talk about Woodstock, or he'd give me some lecture about planes, which is always interesting. John taught me how to talk to cops. He taught me what battles are sort of worth making a stink about and which ones I should shut up about, although I didn't always listen. I think the thing that I respect most about John is the fact that he was a team player. For him, it was never about his ego or his byline. It was always about the story, so I knew that if I came in and there was some big breaking news thing happening and John had started it in the morning, I could pick it up, and it was never about making sure that his name got there. It was always about the best story.
Okay, I only have one thing to say about John Burman, and before there was Wikipedia, there was John Burman. Enough said. We'll miss you, John.
I already miss John's visits to my corner of the newsroom. Whenever he stopped by, I knew I was in for a really good story that would usually end with a great idea for me to follow up on. I can't tell you how many of my stories started with a tip from John. So John, I wish you all the best. You're missed already, and please keep in touch with your ideas.
I've known John for 32 years, and in honor of his retirement, I have written a short essay entitled 3 Important Things About Journalism I Learned from John by Lee Prokaska, Spectator staff. Number 1, how to do pickups without crying, especially if the dead person is a child. Number 2, where to look when you're at a messy fatal car accident so as not to embarrass yourself and barf on the cop's shoes. Number 3, always remember to write for the readers, not for your own ego. John also helped me with a series of personal crises when I was a very young reporter. When I started, I worked 3 to 11 forever, and he often pulled the 6 p.m. till 2 a.m. cop shift. So he was the only person in Hamilton I knew who would for sure be awake after midnight if I called him with a crisis. Crisis number 1. John convinced me that even if I had eaten mouse poison, which he highly doubted, it was probably not going to kill me because mice are so much smaller after all. Number 2, he also convinced me I was unlikely to have sustained brain damage after whacking my head really hard on an open cupboard door, although the jury may still be out on that one. Number 3, he got up early one morning after a long night shift to come to my apartment and install a chain lock on my door because I was convinced someone was going to break in while I was asleep. I don't know what I would have done without him. And just remember, Johnny, you promised me the first dance at the old folks' home. See ya.
John, I'll always remember this one story. I actually don't remember the story, I just remember your reaction to it, where you sent me an email to thank me for keeping you in a double byline. And here was a veteran reporter who I looked up to, who I really admired and helped me in my young career, who still, I don't know, took the time to send me a note and be grateful for a double byline that you deserved anyway. So thank you for showing me what it means to be humble and a real reporter who wasn't in it for the byline but was in it for the story and for the community of the newsroom. So thanks so much and all the best in your retirement.
John, I've worked with you for the better part of 20 years in almost every version of yourself, and I'm going to miss you. I think you've been cantankerous, grumpy, rebellious, insufferable, and always a great person to work with. We miss you already, and I look forward to seeing you shortly. Goodbye.
Hello, John. I was looking forward to collaborating with you on the Vintage Plane Geek file, but unfortunately almost as soon as I've arrived, you've traded in your wings and gone off into retirement, left me flying solo. I'm going to miss doing our midday handoff, and as I say, I'd really look forward to doing some nitty-gritty projects with you. Hoping that down the road I can catch up with you for a beer now and then and pick your brains, and at least with perhaps your expertise and your blessing, get some of these projects rolling nonetheless. Anyway, good luck in retirement, my friend, and we'll see you soon.
Hi, John. I just want to say we missed you, and come back, and crime hasn't been the same since you left.
And we feel like we've lost a pillar of the newsroom, somebody who has a lot of experience and has always had a really neat antidote to tell people, or anytime you had a tidbit of information, he was just a wealth of info, knew something about everything.
Made our mornings exciting.
We miss you.
John Burman was one of a kind. He was old school when old school was cool. I used to call him the Burmanator. And the reason I called him the Burmanator was because, like the Terminator, there was no stopping John Burman on a story. He was professional, he went about, he knew how to get the story, and he knew that the wrong place to get the story was in the newsroom. John Burman got out of his seat and went out and talked to people and did journalism the old-fashioned way. But he was great at it, and we'll really miss him. All the best, John.
Hey, John, I remember meeting you 30 years ago, about 30 years ago, at the Brantford train station. A group of us were headed to Windsor for the WONAs, the Western Ontario Newspaper Association Awards. Back then, the winners were announced ahead of time, and at the awards, we're seated at a head table, which is where Larry ended up. I was not at the Spec then and didn't really know anyone else. You invited me to join your table, which was very kind, a trait I saw many times over the years in you. That trait and your love of a good story and the fact that, that you're a great mentor to new colleagues and a great supporter to many of the rest of us has garnered you the respect and admiration of so many of us. John, you were a wonderful person 30 years ago. You're a wonderful person now. I wish you many happy days ahead.
John, you'll be missed. You were ranch hand at Roundup and rear gunner and Spitfire pilot during the Battle of Britain. That's how I regarded working with you on the morning, so all the best, man.
Hey, John. Rain or shine, heartache or joy, you showed me it's always about the story. We talked about that during our first sandwich together at Elves in the old TH&B on Hunter Street. We talked about reporting during long beers on your front porch on Dundurn. And your reporting tied up loose ends that resulted in my marriage. Thanks, I think. You also taught me the value of mentoring, and that's why it's important that I'm joined by Molly, another one of your understudies.
I learned more from you on smoke breaks than they ever could have taught me in a classroom. You taught me about Nissans, warplanes, Woodstock, Ontario, but most importantly, you told me that the story is more important than the byline. And I promise I'll never forget to get the name of the damn dog.
Thanks, John, for years of reporting, your work on Deadline, and your mentoring.
A newsroom without John Burman is like a newsroom without police scanners. Oh shit, we lost on both those counts.
Cheers, John.
We miss you already.
One other thing.
It's Molson.
The name of the dog.